Welcome to Flavor Text, a podcast where we explore the intersection between lore, gameplay, and story. See how I shifted that around? See what I did there? Arkham Horror, the card game. I'm CrabbyTerror8, and I'm joined, as always, by my esteemed colleague, Kevling. How are you, Kevling?
Hello. I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm pretty good. Yeah. Glad I'm not in an asylum anymore, that's for sure.
Oh, yes. Yes, but we are still in the asylum, aren't we, based on our practice plan?
Actually,
yes.
Technically we are. That's right, forever.
Yes. We're just imagining this current conversation. Or we're sat in like the infirmary or something, just having this chat with each other, pretending that we're here in the future.
That's right. With Mr. What was it?
Recording our conversation.
What was his name? Mr. Fibbles or Flibbles, or what was the name in Red Dwarf? You know, he's talking to the hand puppet.
Oh, Mr. Flibble, yes. Mr. Flibble says game over, boys.
Yeah. Oh, that's one of my all-time favourite Red Dwarf episodes. But anyway, what have you been up to since we last spoke?
What have I been up to? Well, we're in the League of Extraordinary Investigators, and after a spectacularly high-scoring first round of the Dream Eaters, I scored pretty badly in the second one and got killed before I even found my way to the attic.
Oh dear.
And then obviously you were just telling me that you did even worse.
Yes. I didn't get killed, but I didn't manage to resign, so I didn't get enough. I was doing it all blind, which is my excuse. I was doing it all blind. I only got 2 victory points, and I got to the bottom of the stairs. And spoilers, by the way. People are like, yes. Which scenario?
For a future episode.
Which scenario are you talking about? I got to the bottom of the stairs, but I couldn't resign in time. So unfortunately, yes, didn't do very well at all. So, it's on my YouTube channel for everybody to see how badly I've done. So I always put them on private once they've been viewed and scored. I think people have actually asked me about the league, and so I suppose we should post a link in the notes if people want to join, I suppose.
That's probably a good idea.
Yeah,
because we're about halfway through the season, aren't we? 2 more scenarios to go, and then we'll be all geared up for, I guess, Innsmouth next, is it?
I guess so.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's good fun, and it's a nice way of, playing the scenarios. As long as you can stream your game and let somebody else, you feel comfortable about someone else scoring you and that kind of thing. It's a nice way of being in a friendly. It's a pretty friendly league, so
It is. Yes,
it's great.
Other gaming wise, what have I been doing? I've been getting back into the Elder Scrolls Online on the PlayStation.
Ah, yeah.
I've not played that for a while, but yeah, I do quite enjoy that. Picked up really, really cheap last year.
Yeah.
It was like a bundle with all of the DLCs for like about £12 or something like that. So there's hundreds and hundreds of hours of stuff in there.
It's Skyrim type content. Is that right?
It is, yes. It's the same universe as Skyrim, but I think 1,000 years before or something like that. So it's mega prequel. Right. But you visit all the same landmarks and things are there, but obviously earlier.
Right.
But it's basically an MMO without any monthly charges.
Okay.
It's a similar model to Destiny, if you're familiar with Destiny, where they'll do one big DLC every year with a load of new content in it, and then a few smaller ones through the year. It was a good cheap bundle, lots of gameplay in there. I've got a friend that also plays it, and that's about it. Game wise, board game wise, I played a game of Warhammer Underworlds yesterday for the first time with my youngest. My brother got me a copy that, even though Warhammer are based 10 miles down the road in Nottingham, there was a version of this game that was only available in America.
Oh.
At the shop that my brother's wife worked at.
Right.
They reduced it to like $10.
Okay.
So I said, would you mind just grabbing me a copy and sending it me over? He goes, yeah, no problem at all. And it cost him $90 to ship it.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, I don't think I was in very good books then. But yes, we had a game of that for the first time yesterday, and yeah, we really enjoyed it. Looking forward to another game. Sort of like an arena combat.
Okay. Why wasn't it released in the UK? Why was it only in the US? Or?
I don't know. Games Workshop seem to do this thing where they have a deal with Barnes and Noble where they release special versions of their games, almost like slightly cut down versions to try and get people in. I think.
Right.
But for some reason, it's exclusive to Barnes and Noble in America.
Okay.
I think they started showing up in game over here, but it's ridiculous seeing it's a British company. But
yeah,
never mind.
Yeah, and I imagine this.
But yeah, that's it. Really.
I imagine the spelling's all wrong in the rule book.
I didn't even think of that. It's all got it's ridiculous. I've had this thing shipped from America, and it's got printed on the back, "Made in Nottingham."
Well, it's had quite a trip.
Yeah, I've not exactly helped my carbon footprint there, have I?
Fantastic.
What about you? What have you been playing this week other than Elden Ring?
Yes, only Elden Ring now. Oh boy, what a game! I'm level 75 plus now. I'm playing a faith build, strength and faith. So I have this massive sword that deals massive amounts of holy damage. Still die, of course, but yeah, I'm doing okay. So yeah, I
don't know how they did it. I saw a video online of someone who'd come up with a build where your entire body is made of steel and you're streaming a plume of fire out in front of you at all times. So I don't know whether it was like a hacked copy on PC.
Sounds like
it was literally just walking around absolutely destroying everything and nothing could touch you.
Yeah, that sounds like a bit of a hack. That one for sure.
Yeah,
there's a legendary figure in the Elden Ring community called "Let Me Solo Her." I haven't reached this boss, but there's a boss who is very difficult, and apparently this person puts down their, summon me in. You summon people into your game to help you, and their title is "Let Me Solo Her." You summon them in, and they're stark naked apart from a weapon, and you just stand back, and they just destroy this boss by themselves. Absolutely legendary!
Wow.
Yeah.
So you've got them on your friends list now,
yeah?
Right. Call them in at every opportunity.
Exactly. So, yes. Yeah. So I did play Exploding Kittens with my kids. That's the only other thing I've played, which is frivolous and fun. But yeah, that's it. So.
Oh, yes. Good stuff.
So, okay. So, mailbag, I'm afraid. No one's written in, so nothing to cover there, I'm afraid. Not even you. We're not even writing in to our own show. So there you go. So I guess we can kick things off. So where were we at last time, Kevling? Where were we?
So last time we were investigating the Arkham Historical Society,
That's
weren't we?
right,
and
yes.
Whatever resolution you come up with, it points you in the direction of a Daniel Chesterfield at the asylum.
Yes.
So, that's where we're off to this time.
Yes.
In the Unspeakable Oath.
In the Unspeakable Oath, exactly, which is only kind of makes sense as a title at the end. It's one of those ones where I guess a lot of them are like that.
And then only if you do only if you make a particular choice at the end.
That's right.
Yeah. But we'll come to that.
Yeah,
later.
we'll come to that quite a bit later. So, like you say, they it's sort of interesting because if you get the resolution that we got, which is basically you get nothing before the cult sort of buggers off, you're sort of left bereft. So they have this sort of at the beginning, before you sort of start the campaign, as a sort of a link, in terms of the story. If the followers of the sign have found the way forward, which is basically you've absolutely failed the last scenario and let them get away with it, they have this sort of quite, I think it's a little bit contrived introduction, that you you sort of it's almost like in your mind you sort of come to intuit that you should go to the asylum. So all the others, you kind of have a clearer idea, from the previous scenario that you need to find out more about this Daniel Chesterfield because you found that in the Historical Society's records. But if you find nothing, it's really interesting that they felt like they had to contrive this sort of intro one, which is that you'll kind of wake up in this sort of fugue and you've not slept properly and you wonder about Daniel and was he... It wasn't a prison, so it must have been an asylum where I saw him in my dream. Okay, I better go to the asylum. It's so contrived.
Yeah, we will base our entire investigation based on a dream I had last night.
Couldn't they have found couldn't they have found a kind of handled it differently? Couldn't they have sort of, for example, I'm just making this up, as the cultists leave, they could have said the word Arkham Asylum. You know what I mean? It could have been as straightforward as that. But no, they sort of have this whole paragraph.
Or they left some papers on the floor behind them just as they were scurrying out the door.
Exactly. Yeah. But this intro that we had to kind of follow because we knew nothing. And it's sort of they sort of really kind of overdo the the kind of logic leap that you have to go through to then end up at the asylum, which seemed like a little bit, unnecessary. So if you're not that one, you get the other two, which are much more specific. So intro 2 talks about why it's important to go and see Daniel Chesterfield, because he's the only one left alive. Well, not missing, which is incredible. So everybody else has either disappeared or died, and he's the only one left and he's in the asylum. So, you feel like it would be a good idea to go and talk to him, which is the intro you get if you did any other one of the Historical Society ones, that's the one that you get instead.
Yeah, and so we find ourselves going off to the asylum to find Daniel Chesterfield, who is under the care of a Dr. Mintz. Mm-hmm. And apparently both Dr. Mintz and Daniel Chesterfield are in Arkham Horror 2nd Edition as well.
Ah, right.
I did a bit of Googling and found them. So they're not new characters for this. Yep. I mean, I don't know if they're just cards or enemies or something. I've never played Arkham Horror 2nd Edition, so I don't know how the game compares. But yes, even the artwork for Daniel Chesterfield is the same in the enemy version of Daniel Chesterfield. I found a picture of an Arkham Horror 2nd Edition card with that same illustration on it.
Interesting.
So it is all one interconnected universe, isn't it? The Arkham Files universe by FFG. But it's interesting that they are reusing their assets, so to speak.
Exactly. And from a lore perspective in that, is it linked to the Carcosa, or is it, do you know, or...
I honestly can't remember. Like I say, I've not played it. It must be.
Interesting. Well, it'd be interesting to know if any of our listeners know whether he's, is he just there at the asylum, or is he actually explicitly linked to Carcosa as well? Is it sort of a thing,
There's also a final stage of the setup, isn't there? Whereas if we've interviewed Constance Domain, then we get a bit of information from her as well. You recall what she told you, even though you didn't tell you at the time what she told you.
Yeah.
But yes, it's on about Nigel Engram again and having to take this oath. Yes. Yes, saying about this oath, and that maybe Daniel had a similar experience, and that you must speak to him about this.
Yes. Yeah.
So that sort of gives you the drive to then go to the asylum.
Exactly, and I suppose that's the extra benefit. You actually can link it to the Unspeakable Oath, because you wouldn't know that otherwise until the end. So I think we were saying before, you don't know to the end, but actually if you've interviewed Constance Domain, you would know that this oath has...
You know there is an oath, but you don't know why it's unspeakable.
Exactly,
yet.
Exactly.
And then the added bonus there from having interviewed Constance is you put the top card of your deck face down in your play area, and treat it as a courage asset with 2 sanity. So you lose one of your cards from your deck, but it gives you a bit of soak for the horrors you're about to face.
Yes.
I suppose mechanic-wise, I suppose that's you being a bit more prepared, perhaps, for what you're up against.
That's quite a nice mechanic, I thought. It was good, and I certainly
Yeah.
needed it. So it was really good.
And they've not done that but since, have they?
No, not that.
I don't think they've done that
I don't
again.
think so. No. I mean, the card pool is so huge now that it's probably not something necessarily, but it's an interesting idea.
Maybe people didn't like losing one of their deck.
Exactly. I mean, if it was a key card you just upgraded your deck to get, and you just happen to, that's the one. I suppose that would upset people a little bit, or something like that. So it's not so
bit like the swarm enemies in Dream Eaters.
Yeah.
They'll just eat up your cards for temporarily.
Yes, exactly. So it's and I suppose it really sets up well, I think. I mean, I was complaining about that first intro, but apart from that, it sets up really well. You get this feeling you're being let into this asylum, but it really makes it clear that the receptionist gives you a pitying smile and relents, and you are accompanied by these sorts of security guards. It doesn't leave you feeling particularly positive about the idea of being let into this asylum. You're being sort of ushered in, but even at this early stage, you'd be wondering, am I ever going to get out of this place? There's a certain, it certainly feels like a kind of a threatening place to be in that way. So I love the way it does set it up that way. So, yeah.
And then from a mechanical point of view, the setup is we have a deck of monster enemies that we set aside. We have a deck of lunatic enemies that we set aside. And then there's 2 random versions of the East and West Asylum halls. But then apart from that, and also you can choose which of those 2 you start at. But then apart from that, the layout is standard until we uncover the basement later on.
It's sort of like a rough north, south, east, west, right? It's essentially.
It is, yeah. Only there's the furthest at the top, the furthest on the left, and the furthest at the bottom. You're restricted from going into at the start of the game as well. They've all got text on their unrevealed side saying that the door is locked to the kitchen, sort of thing. Yeah. So you're restricted to that sort of central area at first. Yeah. Oh, and then the other choice, is do you have a different version of Act 2?
Yep.
Based on whether you took the class or not.
Yes. So I think if you took the class, you get the really bad ones version 1. And if you didn't, you get the really bad ones version 2. But that's all you know for now. Yes, exactly.
And then this scenario also introduces the exile mechanic on the player cards. So that was we see that quite a lot from here onwards, mainly on Survivor. That basically once you've used a card, if it's got exile on it, it's out of the game until the next, and it's out of your deck, in fact, and you have to replace it at the end of the scenario with another card. Yeah. So that's an interesting mechanic. From this point of view, that's entirely irrelevant because the game isn't even released in that way anymore. The player cards don't come with scenarios anymore. So that's from a bygone age.
Yeah. The classic period.
Do you remember when you used to get player cards with your scenario and you'd only get one scenario at a time? Oh, those were the days.
Funny.
Sorry, I should.
So yes, it's So it's there's a lot of locations, but it's fairly easy to set up. It's not overly complicated in that sense. You've just got to decide whether you start at the east or the west asylum halls, and that's essentially the setup for the game.
Yeah.
Shall we start with the the act and the agenda? And I feel in this one they kind of go in. They kind of go together quite in step with each other in quite a nice sort of way. So
shall I take Agenda 1A?
Yeah, sure. Yep.
Yeah. Locked inside, the patient wing of the asylum is far quieter and lonelier than you had expected. The hall reeks of chemicals and body odour. As soon as you are escorted inside, the doors behind you are closed and locked tight. But it is only a 2 threshold on the doom there, so it's not going to take long at all before this advances.
No, and the picture on the side doesn't exactly inspire confidence, does it? It's I don't think it's us, but
it sort of contradicts the description as well. It's quieter and lonelier than you had expected, apart from those people leading a guy in straitjacket down the middle of the corridor.
Yes, and the lady sitting in the background, I've just noticed as well. So, there are quite a lot of people there. But it certainly, again, just reinforces this sense of foreboding that this isn't just going to be a nice stroll through a hospital and then we're going to leave again. You increasingly get the feeling that trying to get out of this place is going to be quite difficult.
Definitely.
Yes, and I think Act 1A. Shall I read Act 1A? Or?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So aside from a few patients giving you a wide berth, there aren't any orderlies or doctors around to speak with. Looks like you'll have to find Mr. Chesterfield on your own. So it's interesting that you're supposed to be, Dr. Mintz is supposed to be helping you out, but you're not really going to him. You're sort of left to wander around the asylum, which starts to make you wonder, are you actually... I start to make me wonder, are you actually supposed to be in the asylum, or are you there to actually find Daniel Chesterfield? It starts to make you kind of question some things like that. It's sort of ambiguous.
Looking back to the intro, the nurse says to you that you can't see Dr. Mintz because his level is restricted to staff only. But it says you argue and you insist to be let into the patient wing. And the receptionist gives you a pitying smile. Oh, of course. I will schedule you a meeting. These gentlemen will see you in. And then that's when you're escorted into the patient wing. So they've escorted us in there to wander around. Yeah, you're right. But we can't see Dr. Mintz because he's on a different level for some reason.
Exactly.
And when you talk about different levels, the only other level we see is the basement, isn't it? There's reference to it being underground when we get to those cards.
Exactly. So, and if someone came in raving about all this stuff and insisting that they get in to see someone, you can imagine, oh, yes, come on. Like, this is the 1920s, it's hardly like it's, transparent about these things. They'd probably usher you in and so, yes.
Sort of winking at each other as they bring you in.
Oh, of course, yes, come on in. Yeah, that kind of thing.
Yes. You come in, you can have a lovely chat with the doctor. And it's 3 clues per investigator to advance the act, isn't it? Chances are the first thing that's going to happen is that agenda's going to advance with its 2 threshold.
Absolutely. Yes, it certainly is. So, I mean, all we're left with really is this notion. We're not really given we know we're trying to find Daniel, but we're not really given any other idea about how we might do that, which makes sense. We wouldn't have in the story. So really what we're doing is just wandering around the available locations, trying to sort of work out what to do basically and find out how we can find him. So that we're sort of left in this sort of not really knowing anything very much.
So if I just read the back of the the agenda card, because that, like I say, that's probably the first thing that's going to happen within a round or so, depending on how unlucky you are with your doom and what have you. Speaking with the patients is proving more difficult than you had assumed. They eye you cautiously and refuse to answer any of your questions, backing away or fleeing if confronted. Either they're not used to guests, or something about you is causing them a considerable amount of distress. Some act like animals backed into a corner, and you think at any moment they might strike. Shuffle the encounter discard pile and each of the set-aside lunatic enemies into the encounter deck. The lead investigator must randomly choose an enemy from the monster deck and place it beneath the act without looking at it. So, having set aside those lunatic cards, they very quickly make their way into the encounter deck. It's like you've got 2 rounds just to wander around with no confrontation, and then that's it.
So I mean, that will barely give you time. I guess you'll cover a couple of locations, but it doesn't.
Yes.
It hardly gives you any time. I mean, from a story perspective, it's like it's going to take some time for people to see you and start shrinking back. But it's interesting that they had that change. You know, they just gave you a couple of, like you say, a couple of turns to just sort of get used to the place before upping the lunatics around the place.
Yeah. We didn't touch on it either, but the scenario card itself, two of the symbols, both the skull and the elder thing, both give you the option or instruction to put one of these monster cards by the act deck as well. So that's sort of, without giving the game away, it's giving you the idea that they're ganging up on you, and they will be let loose at some point in the future.
Yes. And there's this kind of this thing that there's a number of cards in the encounter deck that allow bad things to happen, but you can offset that by putting a monster card in this monster deck.
Yes.
It's sort of robbing Peter to pay Paul kind of idea, because it's like, oh, that would be good. But then you're left, particularly the first time you play it, thinking, what the hell is this monster deck going to be used for? You know, you're sort of obviously putting, you know, it seems like at the moment it's not having any effect, but, you know, somewhere down the track, it's going to have a bad effect at some stage. Yeah, so very quickly you're in a place where you've had a bit of a look, you've got lunatics roaming around the place, and you're going to be still trying to find clues and trying to work out what to do, right? That's kind of going to be the default place that you're going to be at essentially. And you have this second agenda, right, with additional text.
Yes. Right? So Agenda 2A, Tortuous Descent. The longer you spend in this hellish place, the more you want to leave. Already it has felt like days. It's only been 2 rounds. You fear that if you are stuck here much longer, you will become like the patients, a husk of your former self, unruly and dangerous.
Oh, okay. Yes. So I mean, that's it now. I mean, really, that's it. It's like a exfiltration. So a lot of scenarios in Arkham Horror are you get into a place like the last one, and then you get out again. This one is really more you're in a place and you kind of want to get out, right? It's I mean, technically you've gotten in, but you start in the middle. You don't start at the entrance way, sort of work your way through, and then you're starting right in the middle of it. And it's like a Prison Break movie, right? Yeah. In fact, this plays like a Prison Break movie, because you've got to do all kinds of things to get the hell out of here. So, and it'd be interesting at the beginning, particularly the first time, because as you're going through the rooms, you start to notice there's these other things you can do, but you're not exactly clear why you would do them. In the first instances. So, yeah. If you get your clues, you then move to a key to the basement. So you'll have noticed as you're going around, you can't get into the basement. That's one of the things you can't do. But then once you get your 3 clues per investigator, you flip it to Act 1B. Turning a corner, you nearly bump into a nurse with light brown hair and sharp features. You tell her about the violent patients and the strange things you've seen, but she doesn't listen. When you inquire about Daniel, she informs you that he is a patient of Dr. Mintz and that he resides in the secure basement level. Unfortunately, she refuses to let you into that area of the asylum. So this is a key thing. You now know that's where he is. And then it gives you, this is really nice. I really like this. It gives you all these options to get the clues, get the key. And you basically can try each of these out. They're fairly high shroud, but it shouldn't be too bad. You can either do a fight of 4 as an intimidation, and then if that fails, and any of the investigators can do this, then you can do an evasion of 4, which is sort of a steal. You can steal the keys, and then you can do or you can do an intellect of 4 test. And so these are all tests of 4, and that's to persuade her to give you the keys. Now, if you fail all of those, the default one or the final one is you knock her over and grab the keys. So you resort to violence. So if stealing, persuasion, or intimidation doesn't work, then out and out violence is all that's left to you.
And even though they're all high skill tests, I like the way that you've got the different options then. So if there's different avenues depending on which investigator you're playing as one might be easier than the other, so you might take that approach first. I like that sort of flexibility, sort of different sort of narrative options as to how you've got the key.
Yes, exactly.
And then the last one, like you say, there's no test at all. Knock her over, grab the keys.
Yes.
You took them by force. And we'll find out later that does have an impact.
It certainly does. So yes. So then you've got the key, and you know that Daniel's down in the, in that basement area, and then you get the two Act 2A versions, which I think are identical.
I think the fronts are the same.
They are
aren't
absolutely the same.
Yes.
So what you've got to do is find Daniel. So this is what you've got to do. While the torturous descent is ticking over, you've essentially got to find Daniel somewhere in the basement.
And it's got there that you can then ignore the text on the unrevealed side of Arkham Asylum locations. So you've got the locations like the kitchen that are locked, that you couldn't get into. You can now ignore that text that says that they're locked. And there was an errata as well that they accidentally put Arkham Asylum on the 3 basement locations you need to get into, which had some rule on there to stop you getting in. So actually you could have just wandered in based on the game as it was released. Yes. But no, they didn't actually mean that. Yeah. But again, we'll cover that when we look at the locations in detail.
Yep. Yeah. Right. Yep. So here we are stumbling around the various places. Should we go through the... Speaking of locations, should we go through them? Should we...
That's a good idea. Yeah. So I think it's the perfect point, isn't it, now?
Exactly, yeah. Because actually, once you get to this, there's a lot to do. There's a lot of different things to do. There's getting clues to get places. There's finding Daniel, and then there's all these other little tasks which you're not necessarily sure why you would be doing them, but they're there for you to do.
Yes,
exactly.
So what shall we start with the 2 asylum halls in the middle where we begin the game?
Yep.
Okay. So I'll start off with the western one. Like we mentioned in the setup, there's a choice of 2, not a choice of 2, a random selection of one or the other. They're both exactly the same on the reverse side. The pleasant atmosphere of the reception area disappeared as soon as Dr. Mintz shut the thick iron door behind them. Oh, I didn't realise we'd seen Dr. Mintz.
Because this is a quote from the book.
Oh, of course it is. Yes, of course it is. Ignore me. Yes, it's from one of the FFG books, isn't it? Yeah. The temperature dropped to a clammy chill and a foul, sharp stench hung in the air. From Mallory O'Meara in The Investigators of Arkham Horror. And then there'll be one of 2 different revealed sides. So the first one is 2 Shroud No Clues, with a reaction of after you defeat a lunatic enemy at this location, you can draw a card. With the flavour text. As they walked through the meandering stone halls of the sanatorium, Carolyn began to feel uneasy. It seemed like it would be very easy to get lost. And again, that's from the same book. And then the second version is, rather than a benefit like that one by defeating an enemy to gain a card, this one makes the enemies more difficult. Each lunatic enemy at this location gets +1 horror. It's 3 shroud, but there is 1 clue per investigator there. And then it's the same quote about Carolyn.
Yeah, so that's the western.
Not sure the mechanical reason as to why the lunatic enemy would be more difficult or have a higher horror attack at that location, but we'll take it.
Yeah, it's like one gives you a clue, but it's worse with the lunatic enemies, and the other one gives you no clues, but you can get a card for defeating. And
yes. Okay, it's just balancing the 2 out, isn't it? I guess.
And chances are you're going to end up with lunatic enemies at these locations, or at least one of them anyway.
Yes.
So, yes. The Eastern version, I think, has got the same text on this side. Yes, it does. So it's got the same text on that side. And on the other side, again, same text, so they haven't changed the text. But these ones, again, it's a 3 shroud 0 clue. Take 1 horror, automatically evade a lunatic enemy. So you can spend a horror to automatically evade a lunatic enemy, or you get the 2 shroud, 1 clue per investigator. But this one, at the end of your turn, after you end your turn at this location, take 1 horror and gain 2 resources. So, interesting.
Yeah, so both of those give you horror, but with a benefit.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. So, you can get some combination of these two in some way, depending. So some are going to have clues on them, or, you're just going to get some combo of those two.
Yeah, if we move left into the mess hall, a wide open doorway leads into the asylum's mess hall where patrons will have their meals. It's quieter than you expected. There are no chairs scuffling, dishes clanking, or patients speaking with one another. I mean, when you look at the picture, there's no one there at all, which probably would explain that. But I guess what they're trying to say is even the people there, they're sat there in utter silence. And then when you reveal it, it's 2 shroud, 2 clues per investigator. And as a forced effect, after you successfully investigate the mess hall, choose and discard a card from your hand. The flavour text: rows of tables are covered in dirty dishes and stale food. You get the feeling they took mess too literally here. Oh. Hilarious.
And there's blood on the floor, apparently, as well. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And it's a victory point location as well, yes.
And that leads into the kitchen if you keep moving. No, that's locked unless you've moved into the next... you're on Act 2A. But here it's... the narrow door in the back of the mess hall is locked. The scent that strikes you from behind the door is foul and repugnant. Yum. And actually looking at this... dinner, exactly. More blood everywhere. It's not exactly an inspiring place, is it? And this is a 2 shroud, 1 clue per investigator location. It has an action. If there are no clues on the kitchen, test 2 willpower. If you succeed, remember that you set a fire in the kitchen. And it says dirty dishes fill the sinks and cover the countertops, and an unidentifiable sludge boils on the stove. Oh boy. So here's the first instance of you can do something which you may or may not... Why? Like, if you never played the scenario and you turn up here, you'd be like, why would I want to do that?
Why would I set fire to
exactly.
the kitchen?
Yes.
I remember when we went to the casino and we cheated, we got punished for it. I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not going to set fire to the place.
So I think we'll talk later about the strategies that you might employ once you know this scenario a bit different. But yes, so this is one of the places where you can take a little action and do something. So, yeah.
And then at the opposite end of the corridor, you've got the infirmary, if I've got that right.
Yep.
And the unrevealed side says, the scratched plaque on this wooden door reads, Infirmary. This must be where the doctors treat their patients. Specialist subject, the bleeding obvious.
Yeah. I wish they'd put treat in inverted commas. Treat their patients.
Yes. And then, the revealed side, infirmary, 3 shroud, 1 clue per investigator. As an action, you can heal a damage and take a horror, or heal a horror and take a damage, but only once per round. And a rather menacing bit of flavour text. Our methods are proven.
Yes, and that's nicely reflected in the action, because you can heal a damage, but you take a horror. Or you can heal a horror and take a damage.
Yes.
So, it's like it's not what you call exactly therapeutic.
No. I didn't read it out properly, but the damage or the horror that you take has to be direct damage. So your investigator has to take it. So you can heal an ally, but you have to take the horror or the damage accordingly. And it is another victory point location as well.
Yeah. And then moving north from the western patient wing, is the yard. And the fresh air and the illusion of freedom makes the asylum's courtyard a common gathering place for patients. Though the barred windows, dead tree branches sway through the barred windows, dead tree branches sway in the wind. grey overcast skies trap the asylum in a dull limbo. Oof. Sounds awful, doesn't it? And this is a one shroud, one clue per investigator location. While you're investigating the yard, it gets +1 shroud for each horror on you. So investigating the yard at the end of the scenario is a really bad idea.
Yes,
if you know
that, definitely an incentive
right,
there to do
that's
it. That's
right. If you know this scenario, you would do the yard early. Now there's an action
because there's nothing stopping you getting in there like there is on the other location. So yes, you can do this right at the start.
Exactly.
Of the game.
And the action is, if there are no clues on the yard, take 1 damage. Remember that you incited a fight amongst the patients. So again,
so we can set a fire. Yes, we can start a fight. Yes. This seems very disruptive.
Yes, it does. It does. Why would we want to do that, Kevling? Why?
And then north of the yard is the garden. And again, this is another one of the locations that is locked, that you can't enter until Act 2A onwards. A lone statue stands sentinel over the garden. Cold wind causes dead leaves to roll gently across the garden path. So even though that text there, I never actually noticed the statue there, silhouetted by the tree.
Yeah, sort of.
I only ever saw the tree and the crows.
Yeah, sort of a robed figure looking rather ominous.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then on the revealed side, 3 shroud, 1 clue per investigator, and that has an action. If there are no clues on the garden, test evade of 2, or agility of 2, should I say. If you succeed, remember that you distracted the guards. And then the flavour text says, 2 guards in white uniforms stand by the gate to the garden, keeping watch. Again, although they're not in the artwork.
They've clearly been distracted.
That's after you've distracted the guards. That image was taken.
So that's all that. So then we're down in the base. This is the basement hall, which of course you can't. That's locked, and you can't enter it unless you're in Act 2A. Dank air drifted out of some of the darker hallways. Carolyn asked, "Do some of these passageways lead underground?" Nurse Heather nodded. "It's a very old building, Doctor." Yeah, it looks very Victorian, doesn't it? So that's from the again from the book. And so the basement hall is 4 shroud, 1 clue per investigator. It's a victory 1. Forced, after the basement hall is revealed, put the 4 set-aside patient confinement locations into play. So this is the classic, you open a door into a room and there's other rooms randomly assigned. And this is that. It's got a victory point if you do manage to investigate it. A cramped stone staircase leads deep underground to the basement level of the asylum. Cries and howls of anguish torment you from behind the hall's many iron doors. You can't imagine what it would be like to live your days in this place. Yes.
I like that because that's a bit of foreshadowing.
It certainly is.
Potentially. Yes.
Exactly.
Right. Is this the right time to look at the confinement
I think
cells,
so.
or do we need to pop back to the agenda?
Well, the agenda and the act are really kind of,
Oh, we've got to find Daniel.
we've got to find Daniel because that then trips
Yeah.
the next set of sort of things that we've got to do. Yeah.
I wasn't sure if there was a previous stage we needed to trip, but we've already done that, haven't we? Yeah, you can delete that bit. Okay, so I'll take them in the order that the first one I've got here, patient confinement. They're all the same on the reverse. As an additional cost to enter the patient confinement, you must spend a clue. So that's the bit that got errated. The initial printing had the Arkham Asylum trait on there, which meant you could have ignored that requirement, which obviously was not the intention. So each of these patient confinement cells, they're all connected to the basement hall, but they're not connected to each other. So you have to keep going into the confinement cell, see what's there, back to the basement, into the next one, see what's there, back to the basement, and so on. So the first one I've got here is actually Daniel's cell, so that's the one that we're looking for. It's 2 shroud, 1 clue. It's a fixed number of clues, not per investigator. And then as soon as you reveal this, that is when you would advance the Act 2. Daniel's windowless cell is hopelessly dank and grim. The walls are covered in erratic scribbling, which, upon further inspection, appears to be passages from the King in Yellow.
Yep. So that's Daniel's cell.
And then we'll look at the other ones as well. Do you want to take the next one?
So where's 179? Here we go. So this version is 5 shroud, 1 clue in this one. So yes. And you don't get a victory point for it either. So it's action test 2. This is an occupied cell, it's called. You can test 2 fight to release the patient here from his bonds. If you succeed, he howls like a wolf and tears off through the basement. Remember that you released a dangerous patient. Yes, and we actually know who this patient is. That is giving us a hint. Wolfman Drew. Yes.
Is it?
Yeah, because it's wolf.
Like howls like a wolf.
And he's dangerous because he's a cannibal. Basically, he eats people. So,
I never made that connection before.
Yeah. So it's Wolfman Drew that we let out.
And I like the fact as well that you don't need to clear the clue to do that test, unlike the other locations where you have to. He says if there are no clues, you can do this, which is probably good on a 5 shroud location. Okay, the next one I have is the dreary cell. As if that separates it from all the others, yes. Oh, this one's particularly dreary. I
was thinking the opposite. Oh, that makes it so much better. It's only dreary.
It's an upgrade. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. That's right, it's an upgrade.
So this is 3 shroud, 1 clue again. And I guess they're all a fixed 1 clue because you need a clue to unlock the next one. So it's just making sure you don't run out of clues. As an action, test intellect of 2 to speak to the patient here. If you succeed, you are able to interpret her ravings and remember that you know the guard's patrols. A chill gloom envelops this windowless cell. Being locked in here for a day would be torturous, let alone for months.
Yeah. There we go. And the final one here is familiar cell. Now, that's interesting, isn't it? That it's a familiar cell, so that you actually go, oh, yeah, this is familiar.
Have I been here before?
Yes, exactly. And this is a 2 shroud location, 1 clue. You can test willpower X, where X is the amount of horror on you. If you succeed, you recognize the room and remember that you recalled the way out. So you have been here before. So this is the thing. This is not the first time you've been to Arkham Asylum. Yes.
Yeah. And the idea there is sort of almost like you're testing your own sanity then to try and recall what you remember.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah. So there you go. Yes.
Interesting. Yeah. So that's all the locations, isn't it?
That's a lot. Yes.
So yes, we're on Act 2A, one of the 2 different versions, aren't we?
That's right.
And it was find Daniel Chesterfield to advance. So you were doing this act card, weren't you? So shall I hand back to you?
Okay. So there's 2 versions of this. So version 1 is called 3 Geese in a Flock. I don't know what that means. Do you know what that means? 3 geese in a flock? Oh, I've got it.
I might do a quick Google while you're reading.
So, so this version is the one if you've got the Onyx. When you enter this cell, you find Daniel huddled in the corner of the room, sobbing and rocking back and forth on the ground. No mask, he stammers over and over. You help him to his feet and try and console him, telling him that he's not crazy, that strange events have been occurring throughout town ever since the King in Yellow returned to Arkham. It's Nigel, he explains, gripping you tightly. Nigel made us speak his name. He made us speak the oath, and now he lives inside us, controlling us. Don't you understand? He rambles on. We spoke his name, and the price was paid. H, O King. See, I can't even bring myself to say his name now. So you believe you might understand more about the situation if you can calm him down, but you'll have to get him out of this asylum if you're going to accomplish that. So you choose an investigator to take Daniel as a Daniel card. He's a ally, so he takes up an ally slot. And then you shuffle the encounter discard pile, and each enemy beneath the act deck, which is the monster enemies, into the encounter deck. Yeah.
Okay. And apparently 3 geese in a flock is from a children's counting rhyme. It goes 3 geese in a flock, 1 flew east, 1 flew west, 1 flew over the cuckoo's nest.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
Yes.
Very clever.
So given the location we're in, that does kind of, there's a nice little link there.
Yeah. Oh, that's very nice. That's very nice.
Being in an asylum.
Yeah, because I was thinking of 1 flew over the cuckoo's nest, actually, when I was thinking about this scenario. So that's a very nice little connection there. So there you go.
Very subtle,
very
that.
Subtle.
Completely missed that before.
Yeah.
I often miss that piece of text on the end with it being at an angle like that.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
I should pay more attention.
Yeah, there's always some little piece of information it gives us. And Daniel Chesterfield, like I said, you can exhaust him and give him to somebody else, so he can move between different people. Force, when you take horror, if at least one of that horror is not assigned to Daniel, take a damage. So you've got to pile horror onto him. So he's fairly fragile, shall we say? And forced, if Daniel Chesterfield leaves play, remove him from the game. So for whatever reason he goes. So that's so you're basically kind of trying to usher him out of the asylum with that version. If you've taken the Onyx, if you haven't taken the Onyx, you get Daniel's warning. When you enter his cell, you find Daniel huddled in a corner of the room, sobbing and rocking back and forth on the ground. No mask, no mask, he stammers over and over. You help him to his feet and ask him if he remembers about the king in yellow, but he interrupts you. Don't speak his name, he exclaims frantically, his eyes wide with a yellow glow. Nigel made us speak his name. He made us speak the oath, and now he lives inside us, controlling us. Don't you understand? He rambles on. The man approaches wearing a crazed expression, and you take a wary step backwards. We spoke his name and the price is paid. H, O king! Then suddenly he transforms before your very eyes. His bones twist and snap. His body warps grotesquely. The symbol carved into his forehead burns bright, and a yellow glow emanates from within his body. He lunges to attack you, so you get the monster version of him. He's a 3/4/3. Daniel Chesterfield, at least what's left of him, he's humanoid lunatic elite. If you control, so that's how he then manifests. So instead of ushering him out, you've got to deal with a 3/4/3 monster instead. And it's a little bit, his transformation is a little bit what we've seen with the others, the Constance domains and the like. They've transformed into sort of horrible versions. So there we go.
But then we have the clever action there, don't we?
Yes.
If you control the clasp of Black Onyx, you can parley with him. Show him the clasp. He staggers backward, collapsing into a motionless husk. Add him to the victory display. As easy as that.
Oh, wait.
Hang on a second. I think that's absolutely brilliant, because it makes you think that in some permutation of this scenario, in some reality, there's a way we can deal with him quite easily, but the reality is absolutely not.
No.
Playing into the old doubt and conviction there.
Yes, exactly.
Making you doubt yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in fact, I posted up on Facebook because I was like, hold on, there's an error here. Hold on. So I'm posting on Facebook. And then I realized, oh boy, this is all a big troll, really. Just exactly. So very, very clever. Yes.
Definitely.
Yep.
Brilliant stuff.
So I'm not sure whether, I guess it's probably better if you get the unfighting version, because you don't have to mess around. I mean, you could just evade him and just leave, right? You don't have to fight him as such. But it's probably better you get the ally version if possible. So, yes. Yep.
Yeah, but I think, let me just remember, I think you only get the clasp if you successfully complete the previous
Correct.
act.
That's right.
But if you defeat the Oathseeker, you don't get the clasp.
Right.
Or if you doom out, you don't get the clasp. So it's only resolution 1 or 2 on Echoes of the Past that give you the choice of taking or leaving the clasp. So actually only one resolution out of the 4 gets you the clasp.
Yep.
So more often than not, just statistically, you're likely not to have it, and you have to deal with the enemy that you can't deal with a class.
Exactly. Yes. So this clasp, it's it's really a pain to have, but if you've got it, it does help in this scenario somewhat. So yeah.
Yeah, because it's a weakness basically, isn't it? The clasp.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's stuck with you for the rest of the game. So
yes.
Yep.
Okay, so that then moves us on to Act 3, planning the escape, and now things start to come into start to make a little bit more sense as to some of the things that we've been seeing as we've gone through so far. With or without Daniel, you have to get out of this place as soon as you can. Again, ignore the text on the unrevealed side of the Arkham Asylum locations. Objective: if investigators have performed 4 of the following, you must advance. So know the guards' patrols, set a fire in the kitchen, incited a fight among the patients, released a dangerous patient, recalled the way out, and distracted the guards. So now we know why we needed to do those things, and if we decided not to do them, we've now got to frantically run around and do them anyway.
Yes, and the difference is now there's going to be lunatics and all kinds of things standing in our way. Yes, exactly. So that shows it's really clear that we've got to get those things done, like you say. Now, some of them are we can get a couple of them done. Is release a dangerous patient, know the guards' patrols, recall the way out. So you could...
Oh, and remember the way out.
So sorry, there's 3 there. So you could...
Yeah.
And I guess the good thing is if Daniel happens to be the last room you discover, you may have gotten 3 of them, which means you only need 1 more to get out.
Yes.
Or if you've got a couple of them, you can sort of work out. But it's going to be easier most of the time to get the ones in the patient confinement towards the end of the scenario, because you're probably not going to have large numbers of... because quite a few of the lunatics spawn in the asylum halls and things like that. So, yeah.
And also at this point as well, we don't know where we need to go if you're playing this blind. You might have a clue, the fact that there is a gate in the garden being guarded, but you don't know that's the way out until we've done those 4 actions.
So it does make sense to do at least a couple of the patient confinements, depending on how many you manage to do prior, I guess. Yep.
Yeah. And so once you've done 4 of those 6, it says you must advance. So there's no choice in it. There's no hanging around to get the last 2 done as well. No, you've got to go as soon as you've done 4. An orderly scream echoes across the hall. Sorry, this one is titled A Way Out. Within moments, an alarm rings loudly throughout the institution. Nurses and guards rush through the asylum in a desperate attempt to control the situation. You feel dazed and your vision is spotty, as though you've been struck by something heavy. The walls blur together and twist. Creatures begin to emerge out of the crevices and corners that did not exist moments before. Shuffle the encounter discard pile and each enemy beneath the act deck into the encounter deck. So that's these monster cards that we've been saving up throughout the scenario. If at least 3 monster enemies were shuffled into the encounter deck by this effect, the investigator with the lowest willpower discards cards from the top of the encounter deck until a monster enemy is discarded and draws that enemy. So again, on subsequent playthroughs, the aim is to try and keep that number of monsters as low as possible. Beneath 3 anyway. Yes, to prevent you being forced to deal with an extra monster, or not an extra monster, but forcing one out of the deck at that point. So then that reveals Act 4A.
Yes, which is no asylum. All hell has broken loose. Ignore the text on the unrevealed side of Arkham Asylum locations, and the garden gains action if there's no ready enemy in the garden. Resign. Finally, a way out. If each undefeated investigator has resigned, advance. So that's what you've got to do now. You've got to get the hell out through the garden. Yep. Exactly.
Right, so earlier on Agenda 2A, if we hadn't killed Constance Domain, she would spawn in the garden. So that's your ready enemy that's going to be there. Although I can't remember whether she's got Hunter or not, but so So she may not still be in the garden, depending on the timing of when the various agendas and acts advance. But it's setting you up that you've got to get past her to get out if you didn't kill her in a previous scenario.
Yes. Yep.
So we make our way to the garden. We deal with the enemies. We can resign.
Exactly. Yep.
And then so the Act 4B is when our previous decision comes into play, isn't it? About how we got those keys in the first place.
Exactly.
If you took them by force, as you attempt to escape, you are spotted by the nurse you attacked earlier, leading a group of guards. There they are! Quickly restrain them! Resolution 2. Otherwise, the guards are too busy controlling the situation and restraining the asylum's patients to notice your escape. Resolution 3.
There you go. Now, while you're doing that, of course, the like you say, the yellow sign, which is Agenda 2B. So while you're going through that, things are really ramping up on the agenda. Although after the 2, it's sort of 7 and 8, which seems like quite leisurely, but it's not. There's a lot to do, and so it becomes quite tense. You've got a lot of stuff to do, and these agendas flip over fairly quickly. There's quite a lot of cards in the encounter deck which are stymieing you constantly. There's whispers in your head that don't let you move. There's all kinds of things going on that really slow you down. It's quite a frustrating scenario from that perspective, because there's a lot of encounter cards that just, slow you down, not to mention, enemies, lunatic enemies and the like. So the yellow sign in the back of your mind, a force beckons. Have you seen it? It calls to you. Glimpsing something in your peripheral vision, you turn and find a familiar symbol peering back at you wherever you look. It's etched upon the doors, drawn on the walls, painted on the patient's canvases. You can't escape it. So the lead investigator must randomly choose an enemy from among the set-aside monster enemies and put that in the deck. So there's this constant putting monster enemies in the deck. And then that's as you said, if Constance Domain was not slain, then she spawns in the garden and she starts coming for you. So very quickly you can end up with, because I think it's the monster abomination spawns in the basement halls. They spawn there. The mad patient spawns in the nearest asylum halls. So you can have a lot of enemies, not where you are right now, but between you and the where you want to go.
Where you need to
exactly.
Get to.
Yeah. Do you want to do Agenda 3A?
Yep, sure. His domain. Flee. Flee while you still can. So this gains the forced effect. When you would place an enemy beneath the act deck, shuffle it into the encounter deck instead. We've got a doom threshold of 8.
Yep.
So we have a final 8 rounds there to get out. And then the reverse side, masks. The walls close in, your vision blurs, there is screeching in your ears, you are grabbed and cannot fight back. You call for help, but nobody comes to your aid. You look for a way to escape, but instead you see the pallid mask of the stranger staring back at you, around every corner, behind every door, staring at you through every window. That mask, that damn mask. Or perhaps it's you who wears the mask. Each investigator who has not resigned is defeated. If any investigators resigned, those investigators immediately advance to Act 4B. Yeah, so those that have resigned go straight to Act 4B. Yeah, so they've resigned. At this point, they've resigned, and then poor old me is still pottering around trying to get out, and then finally gets defeated by the Act advancing.
Yeah, that's the scenario, right? It's a fairly it's a challenging scenario.
It's a real roller coaster ride, isn't it? That one.
Yeah, it absolutely is. There's a lot to do, and it quickly the doom sort of catches up with you, and there's this mad scramble to get out before everything ends. So it's quite a challenge from that perspective.
Shall we look at the resolutions in the campaign guide?
Yes, let's do that. Yep. Okay,
so I'll go first if that's all right. So investigator defeat. So basically, if anyone is defeated, they've got to read investigator defeat first before the rest of the gang go on to read their individual resolutions. So investigator defeat. Dr. Mintz, the patient has been medicated and is ready to see you now. Nurse Heather opened the file on the desk nearby, taking a moment to review the patient's records. Any changes in the patient's condition? Dr. Mintz asked in a monotone voice. A formality. Both knew the patient was beyond repair. None. The patient's delusions remain, demanding to speak with the warden, claiming they were only guests and rambling about that play that aired the other night, The King in Yellow. And their other crimes, the incident in the theatre. What about 1452 Atlantic Avenue? They believe they were attacked and were defending themselves. Her voice was thick with pity. What could have caused someone to snap like this so quickly? None of the patient's records showed any prior history of mental instability. Can you make any sense of it, Doctor? Who could? Dr. Mintz sighed and stood, grabbing the file from his desk. My job is not to understand, it is to cure. Perhaps my experimental procedures will prove fruitful on this one. The nurse winced and felt goosebumps on her arm. She knew how his procedures would turn out, and she doubted it would prove anything. So I think reading between the lines there, his procedures are what created the monsters. He's creating these monsters out of these lunatics, inverted commas.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is quite nice how it all sort of pulls together. Yeah. And the outcome there is each investigator who was defeated is driven insane. If there are not enough investigators to continue the campaign is over and the players lose. If another resolution was reached, the remaining investigators proceed to that resolution. If no other resolution was reached, each investigator was defeated. You go to resolution 1.
That's wow. So is there any other campaigns that can end sort of so abruptly in the middle of the campaign like that?
I don't know. I mean, it doesn't fully end, does it? Because you can carry on with another investigator.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
But yes, there's no. I think that's the earliest kill off of an investigator, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's obviously it's more of a penalty for a solo player, true solo, if there's just one of you, or even if there's a two-hander, than it is if you're, 3 or 4 people. It's quite an ending for a middle of a campaign where usually when you get defeated, it's like, oh well, you just take a trauma or something and sort of move on, that kind of thing.
Yeah, this is only scenario 4, isn't it? So yeah, like you say, we're only halfway through.
Exactly. I mean,
halfway through and it's game over.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine they could have had something where you're there for weeks, and then eventually your friends and family manage to get you out, but you take a mental trauma, or a physical or mental trauma or something. Yeah. But they decided to sort of that's it, end game. Which is kind of surprising for scenario 4 that they would do that. So it's quite brutal, really. Yeah.
Yeah, the nearest thing I could think of that's similar is there's that infamous scenario in Forgotten Age that can change the rest of your campaign, but we'll come across that in the months to come.
Exactly. It's rare, though. I mean, at the end of campaigns, the final couple of scenarios, you often get that, but that's different. But this is like you say, only scenario 4, so it's a hell of a thing to throw in there at this time. In that way. So shall I read resolution 1? Yeah, right. And so ended the madness of the King in Yellow. So in your campaign log, record that the King claimed its victims. If there's not enough investigators to continue the campaign is over and the players lose. Otherwise, the campaign continues. Each investigator whose investigator has been driven insane must choose a new investigator, right, from a pool. Yeah. Check campaign log if you...
Yeah, I think it's just a bit of clean-up, isn't it, this resolution, just to sort out how we carry on, like you say.
Exactly. Check campaign log if you took the Onyx, choose a new investigator to take the clasp. That investigator must include the class of Onyx in their deck. This card does not count towards the investigator's deck size. Each investigator earns experience equal to the victory X value of each card in the victory display. Well, how does that work if you've all been defeated? Why would you get victory? Is this your new investigators? If Constance Dumain is in the victory display, VIP slain, remove all cultist, tablet, and elder thing tokens from the chaos bag, then add 2 cultists. Skip interlude 2 Lost Soul and proceed directly to chapter 5, Phantom of Truth. Right, so you skip the interlude.
I guess giving the new investigators a bit of XP is, I suppose, a way of making sure that you're not too disadvantaged at the start of the next scenario. Yeah. You're building on what your predecessors have learned in the asylum, I guess. So, resolution 2. So that was if you fought your way out, I think. Is that, if I remember right? Yeah, so we took the key by force, yeah. So you are confronted by a number of orderlies and security guards who bar your escape. Feeling cornered and trapped, you have no choice but to fight your way through them. As you struggle to escape, several of the patients nearby see the opportunity and attack the guards with a crazed fury. Nurse Heather shrieks and retreats, and in the ruckus you are able to escape, bruised and battered, but free once more. It will take some time for your wounds to heal, but you have no time for that yet. In your campaign log, record the investigators were attacked as they escaped the asylum. Each investigator suffers a physical trauma as they are assaulted by the asylum's guards. Each investigator earns experience equal to the victory display. If we killed Constance, record that, and then we update the chaos bag to take the symbols out and replace them with 2 tablets. And then we proceed to the interlude.
Yep, and resolution 3 is the one where you escape successfully without having to have got the keys. With the asylum staff distracted and patients running amok, you're able to slip away without being noticed. You escape deeper into the garden behind the asylum, where a 2-story tall fence topped with barbed wire is all that separates you from the outside world. You have little time and need to make it far away. Far away from the asylum before the guards return to spot you. Using a straitjacket you found inside to cover the barbed wire, you scale the fence quickly, breaking into a run as you make it to the other side. So, investigators escape the asylum, you get the victory, Constance Domain, and this one you take out all the cultist tablets and elder things and add 2 elder things and proceed to the next interlude. Yep.
That's interesting, that is, because the elder things generally are the worst tokens, aren't they, apart from the auto fail. So it's making it slightly worse for you, even though you managed the best resolution.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So there we have it.
And then both of those resolution 2 and 3. So if you escape, you move on to the Lost Soul interlude. But if you don't escape and it's new investigators, you don't.
Shall we cover the Lost Soul now or next time, or what did you?
It probably makes sense because we've touched on the oath, and given that this is the unspeakable oath, and we've not explained why it's unspeakable, this will answer that question hopefully. So there's 3 choices of the interlude, isn't there? If you had the Daniel Chesterfield ally with you and he was in play at the end of the game, we read the Daniel survived one.
I think they errated that. Sorry, Kevling. They errated that to say just.
Oh, did they? Sorry.
They changed it slightly to if you resign with Daniel.
Oh, right. So you can't escape with him.
You need to resign with him to get the.
Oh no, resign is escape, isn't it? Ignore me. Yeah.
So I think that's just to clarify.
Yes, I guess because I suppose it's just tweaking it because if you got defeated, you could still be classed as being in play when the scenario ended. So it's just clarifying that you have to escape. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. So yes, if you escape with Daniel, you do Daniel survived. Yeah. If we had the enemy version of Daniel, you read Daniel was possessed. Otherwise, you read Daniel did not survive.
Yep.
And the outcome for each of them is basically the same, but we have a different narrative along with it. So if Daniel survived, you decide to lay low for some time in Mars boarding house and hide Daniel from the authorities, although you're unsure how long you'll be able to stay in Arkham with an escaped asylum patient. Daniel is a loose cannon, dazed and unresponsive one moment and screaming for his life the next. It takes several days for him to realise he's no longer institutionalised, which for some reason makes him even more terrified. He's coming for me, he rambles sometimes for hours at a time. Finally, during an unusually warm and starry night, Daniel is calm enough to open up to you. The King in Yellow, it's not just a play, he explains. It's a being named Haster, and he's already claimed me. But there's still time for you. You are not yet possessed. You have yet to speak the oath. Whatever you do not speak his name, even though I just did. Do not give in. You ask him about the strange events that have been happening across town and of the cultists and creatures you've encountered. They are trying to find Carcosa, he says matter-of-factly. You recognise the name as the fictional city from the play, the one the King in Yellow rules over. They want to release H-Word from his prison. But you can open the way to Carcosa before they do. You can seal H for good. He grips you tightly as he rants. Quickly, before the stranger discovers our plan. Hours later, Daniel is incoherent and unresponsive once more. You take a long walk to ease your thoughts, mulling over this new information. You're unsure what to make of his wild claims. Before you can make a decision about what to do next, you return to find the door to your room broken open. Daniel lies in a heap on the ground, his face colourless and body limp. Judging from the bruising around his neck, you surmise that he has been choked to death. Each investigator earns 2 additional experience as they gain insight into the machinations of the Tattered King, and then you must choose either possessions and oaths, there must be another explanation for all of this, proceed to ignore the warning, or we must heed Daniel's warning. We must not speak the name of the King in Yellow, proceed to heed the warning. So we'll come on to what those mean after we've looked at the other options, shall we?
So if Daniel didn't survive, so this is, he gets defeated before he gets out. You decide to lay low for some time in Mars boarding house, unsure whether news of the events at the asylum will get out to the general public. You take this time to make extensive notes of the events you've experienced thus far, including the brief dialogue between you and Daniel. He'd spoke of the King in Yellow as if it were an actual being and even named it Haster. He'd rambled and muttered and screeched other phrases as well. You doubt you'll ever forget them. He made us speak the oath. The price was paid. They are opening the path to Carcosa. For hours you think about Daniel's warning to you, which he begged you to heed. Do not speak his name. His final moments play out in your mind over and over again. And then possession, oaths, all this, it's the same thing again. But he's not with us.
Yeah.
Yep.
But yeah, you just don't get the extra XP for that one. And then if Daniel was possessed, so we had the enemy version of Daniel, you decide to lay low for some time in Mars boarding house, unsure whether the news of the events at the asylum will get out to the general public. Well, this is the same as what you've just read, isn't it? So you're remembering what Daniel said. On the third night, you return to your room to find the door broken open. You enter cautiously, wondering if the police are onto you, or worse, the stranger. You are surprised to find the body of Daniel Chesterfield instead, lying on the ground with a pained, wide-eyed expression on his face. He is dead. His eyes are bloodshot and yellow, and he clutches a copy of The King in Yellow in his stiff hands. You pry the playbook from his deathly grasp and examine it. Daniel has scribbled notes in the margins of each page, mostly incomprehensible, but with a few lucid standouts. The first time the fictional city of Carcosa is mentioned, scrawled next to it, Daniel has written, "Carcosa is real, do not let them open the path." When Casilda speaks of the Tattered King, Daniel has written, "Haster is the king in tatters, locked in his prison in the stars. Seal him away and stop this madness." Your mind swims with questions. How did he escape the asylum? How did he die? And why does he appear human to your eyes now? With little time to spare, you clean the room of your belongings and flee. Daniel's words, which he begged you to heed, play out in your mind over and over again, and it's the same choice whether we ignore or heed Daniel's warning.
I find that the least satisfying of the three, because that's essentially he's a monster and you leave him behind, essentially in the asylum. Why he would then, it says why does he turn up? Why he would then turn up in your room dead with a just happened to be clutching a book with scrawled notes.
The book with his notes
feels like the other two.
And human again.
Exactly. Whereas the other two feel like they make a lot of sense. You recall things he said, or he's been with you and he tells you a lot more. This one just feels, I don't know, it just feels a little bit like, oh, really? He's turned up? Hold on, this was the monster version. Why would he turn up and why would he be dead? And why would he just, it just doesn't, it feels like you could easily have, use the same, the Daniel did not survive. You could have used that for both the other two. Do you know what I mean? You could have just had the, you know what I mean? It just feels a little bit.
Or maybe someone anonymously posts an envelope through your door and it's got Daniel's book in it.
Exactly. Something like that. It just seems very, very strange. He turns up dead in your room.
It's a little bit like the previous scenario where it's the convoluted explanation to make sure that you're still going along the same path as the others.
Yeah, exactly.
But we have a decision to make. Do we ignore the warning or do we heed it? So if we choose to ignore the warning, for hours you struggle with this insight into the King in Yellow. What is true? What is real? Only you can sort through this madness. In your campaign log, record that you ignored Daniel's warning. Mark 2 doubt in your campaign log and proceed to scenario 5.
Yep. And if you heed the warning, for hours you struggle with this insight into the King in Yellow. What is true? What's real? Only you can sort through this madness. Oh, it's the same thing. And in this one, you heed the warning. You mark 2 conviction. You earn an additional experience. And then for the remainder of the campaign, I love this. Any time an investigator speaks the name Haster aloud during a chapter or during setup of a chapter, that investigator must immediately take 1 horror. So it's interesting that you could...
Which actually...
I say it's interesting because if you ignore the warning, you don't have to at all.
And you can actually game it if you're playing someone like... I've forgotten her name. Is it Agnes? Or was it Zoe? One of the
Agnes.
They can take a horror to deal damage out, can't they? So you can just go Haster, you're dead. There you go.
Well, Calvin as well. You can start the scenario and say Haster and take some horror, and then you've beefed yourself up in willpower and is it intellect? Yeah. So yes.
But yes, that's a lovely mechanic. Yes. That is. It's again blurring the lines, isn't it, between the game and reality? So actually, we are becoming part of it, and if we, as the players, mention the name, we are directly affecting the scenario.
Exactly. So it's really nice the way it breaks the fourth wall like that. I like it a lot. It's great. So there we go. So what do you think of this scenario then, Kevling?
It's really good, isn't it? It's like I said at the beginning. It's like an entire game, an entire adventure in one scenario. You find yourself in this strange place. You've got to find your way out. There's these little side quests you can do along the way. You've got choices to make, and then you've got to try and escape. It's really good. Like you say, if some of the narrative elements are a little bit clunky, the way it tidies itself up at the end in one of the resolutions, but other than that, I think it's an excellent scenario.
Yeah.
But tough, like you said earlier.
Yeah, it is an excellent scenario, and I love how it plays on those Prison Break tropes, I mean, what Prison Break movie doesn't have a fight? You get the people starting a fight so you can distract the guards and all that kind of thing. That's a classic.
Or set a fire.
Exactly.
Yes.
It's classic kind of release crazed patients. It's classic stuff like that, which is just fantastic. So, and it's such a horrible, you're in this horrible place and you've got to get out. And I really like, there's lots to do, lots of things to do. You got to find Daniel, you've got to get clues, you've got to, do all these other sorts of activities. There's lots of things to do, and you've got lunatics running around. And I mean, there's some monsters, but in a way, the monsters aren't really even necessary. You could have just had sort of lunatics racing around the asylum with axes and all kinds of things. So it's really good. I mean, it's really fantastic from that perspective. The main thing, I've tried to play this true solo, and it is so punishing for even 2 players.
Yes.
And I think the only thing is I just wish it scaled. So I wish the number of, you have to do 4 out of the 6.
Yeah.
I wish they had a way that you didn't have to do, if there was only one of you, maybe you have to do 2 out of the 6 or something rather than the 4.
Like number of investigators plus 1 or something like that.
Exactly. So actually make it harder for a 4-player game. You've got to do 5 out of the 6. You know what I mean? So I think for me, that's the main. I love the story. I think it's a bit punishing for smaller smaller teams.
I was going to say, we struggled as a two-player, didn't we? We didn't make it out on our practice playthrough last weekend. I think we managed to get most of the actions done, but we just couldn't make it to the garden because we were getting swarmed on all sides, weren't we?
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting because this game does scale. It's one per investigator clue at a location and those sorts of things. But for some reason, I'm not sure why they didn't scale the tasks, which if you try and play it true solo, it's really rough to try and do them. And so there's a lot of strategy in that. One of the things that once you know this scenario is that you're better off trying to get some of those activities like setting fires done at the beginning, because the yard, go to the kitchen, get them done early, because then you'll have little horror on you. There's relatively few, so get those done early rather than trying to get them done later and this sort of thing. So you end up trying to game it because it is so challenging and so hard to do.
Yeah, I was thinking we didn't actually touch on the actual lunatics and monsters, did we? As to what we were actually facing, there were some tough enemies in
absolutely.
there. Particularly the likes of the Asylum Gorger, who was a 4/5/4, and he spawns in the basement, and he does 3 physical and 3 mental damage when he attacks. And then the lunatics or the mad patients are 2/2/3. And you had to take a horror when you attack them. So they're tricky, difficult enemies to face, and like we said, they're sort of swarming you as you trying to escape.
Yeah, and I found I had a handful of those whispers in your head. I had, like, you're trying to get out, you've got whispers in your head. So there's a lot of cards which really stymie you from sort of getting out. Yeah, exactly.
There's also the infamous straitjacket as well, which forces you to discard your assets,
and corrosion as well. Corrosion is like a
good old corrosion,
which is an insta crypt chill. You don't even roll for it. It's a crypt chill, and if you're in a 5 shroud location, you've got to discard assets to that level. So you can find yourself suddenly having to discard all your assets based on something like corrosion. So some really punishing encounter cards as well. So and the man in the pallid mask might turn up somewhere as well. So you might be rushing around trying to get him as well. So I think I love the scenario. I love the story. I just think it's a little bit for smaller teams especially, and the fact the consequences are so, like, full on, you literally end the game. It feels a little bit unbalanced from a game mechanics perspective, I think.
Yeah. We'll touch on the return versions in a future episode, but we did have a quick look, didn't we, after our playthrough last weekend, and the return version of this doesn't fix the main issue there about the scalability.
No.
It's
a little bit surprising. I know a lot of people have house rules. I remember when I was playing it true solo and trying to work out the best way to, because I think I played it 6 times in a row true solo, trying to get through. Just started again, and people were saying, "Oh, we just have a house rule where you scale it. Like, you only have to, if you're solo, you just do 2 of the 6, and that kind of thing."
Makes sense.
Yeah. But not to take away from a fantastic, one of my favorite. It's actually one of my favorite scenarios. Yes. I really like it. I think it's really well done. I love it. So there we are. So yeah. So thank you everybody for following along with us. So next time, of course, we'll be tackling the good old Phantom of Truth. This is where things go from more like, we've gone through more like, okay, this is more, then this happens and this happens, but it's all kind of grounded still in the real world. This is where things start to get really crazy and start to change really quite dramatically. So I'm very much looking forward to that. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you next time. I'm CrabbyTerror8.
I'm Kevling.
See ya.
Bye.
Thank you very much for listening. Please like, comment and subscribe. We'd very much like to hear from you. If you would like to send us your thoughts, send it to ftextpodcast@gmail.com. That's FTEXT podcast, ftextpodcast@gmail.com. You can also listen to this podcast on YouTube. Just go to Out of Ammo, Out of Time, and you will find it there. And it's also available on the usual podcast platforms, iTunes, Google Podcast, that kind of thing. So if you want to subscribe, go there. But until then, I'm CrabbyTerror8, and I'll speak to you soon. Thanks. Bye.